The morning sun of Kepler 442b painted the sky in soft orange colors. Children ran across the green fields outside the New Hope Orphanage. Their laughter filled the air as they played games that kids from dozens of different worlds had taught each other. Sarah Kim watched them from her office window. She had been the director of New Hope for 8 years now. Every day she saw the same beautiful sight. Kids who had lost everything finding joy again. Kids learning to trust adults again. Kids becoming a family with other kids who understood their pain. The orphanage sat in a valley surrounded by gentle hills. Earth-like trees grew everywhere, planted by the first colonists 50 years ago. Clean streams ran down from the mountains. The air smelled like flowers and fresh grass. It was the kind of place that made people believe the universe could be. New Hope housed 847 children. They came from all over human space. Some had lost their parents to pirate attacks. Others survived natural disasters that destroyed their homeworlds. A few were refugees from the small wars that sometimes happened on the edges of human territory. All of them had found safety here. The youngest was 3-year-old Tommy Chen, who still had nightmares about the asteroid strike that killed his family on Tau Ceti 4. The oldest was 17-year-old Maria Santos, who had been here since she was 7. She helped take care of the little ones now. She planned to become a teacher when she graduated next year. The children learned together in bright classrooms. They ate meals together in a big dining hall where every table buzzed with conversation in a dozen languages. They shared bedrooms decorated with pictures they drew and toys they made. They had turned this place into a real home. Dr. James Wright ran the medical center. He treated scraped knees and broken bones with equal care. More importantly, he helped heal the invisible wounds that all these children carried. He taught them that adults could be trusted. He showed them that the universe was bigger than their worst memories. The staff of New Hope came from many different human colonies. They worked here because they believed children deserved safety and love, no matter what terrible things had happened to them. They were teachers and doctors and cooks and gardeners. They were also the closest thing to parents these kids had. That morning, like every morning, the children went to their classes after breakfast. The little ones learned basic reading and math. The older kids studied history and science and art. The teenagers prepared for the tests that would let them attend universities on other worlds if they wanted. Nobody knew that 3 ships were watching them from space. The ships belonged to the Vorac hegemony. The Vorac were large reptiles who walked on 2 legs like humans, but they were covered in dark green scales. They had sharp teeth and yellow eyes that never seemed to blink. They ruled an empire of 40 star systems through fear and military. Power Commander Zeth Ka commanded the 3 ships. He had received orders from the Vorac High Council 2 days ago. Those orders were simple. Claim the Kepler 442 system for the hegemony. Remove any human presence. The Vorac believed this system belonged to them. They said their ancestors had claimed it 5,000 years ago, long before humans ever left their home planet. They had documents that proved this claim. At least, they said they did. The human colonists had their own documents, treaties signed by both species 200 years ago, maps that showed exactly where Vorac space ended and human space began. Kepler 442b was clearly on the human side of the border. When the human colonial governor tried to show these documents to Commander Zeth Ka, the Vorac commander laughed. "Mammalian lies," he said. "Your species creates false papers to steal what belongs to others. We do not recognize these fabrications." The governor asked for time to contact Earth and resolve this peacefully. Commander Zeth Ka gave him 6 hours. Those 6 hours passed quickly. The children of New Hope ate lunch and returned to their afternoon classes. Some teenagers worked in the gardens, growing vegetables for the dining hall. Others practiced music in the arts building. A few played sports on the fields outside. They had no idea that their time was running out. At exactly 2:30 in the afternoon, Kepler 442b time, Commander Zeth Ka opened fire. Plasma beams shot down from orbit. They struck the colonial capital first. Government buildings exploded in balls of green fire. The spaceport disappeared in seconds. The power plant that supplied electricity to half the continent simply vanished. The attack was supposed to hit only military and government targets. That was what Commander Zeth Ka told his weapons officers. Destroy the infrastructure. Force the humans to abandon the planet. Avoid unnecessary casualties. But something went wrong with the targeting computers. Or maybe it didn't go wrong at all. The third plasma beam struck New Hope Orphanage at 2:47 in the afternoon. The main building disappeared instantly. Classrooms full of children learning about history and science and math simply ceased to exist. The dining hall where kids shared meals and stories became a crater of melted metal and burning debris. Sarah Kim died at her desk, still holding the reports she had been writing about the children's progress. Dr. Wright died in the medical center, trying to bandage a scraped knee for 6-year-old Lisa Park. They both died never knowing what hit them. The dormitories collapsed next. Tommy Chen, the 3-year-old who still had nightmares, died in his sleep during afternoon nap time. Maria Santos, who wanted to be a teacher, died trying to lead a group of younger children to safety. The burning building fell on them before they reached the exit. In 17 seconds, 847 children died. Another 200 were pulled from the wreckage over the next few hours, burned and broken and barely alive. The medical ships that came from other human worlds saved some of them. Others died despite the best efforts of the best doctors humanity had. The news spread across human space faster than light itself. First came the emergency broadcasts, then the footage. Rescue workers pulling tiny bodies from smoking rubble. Hospitals, filled with burned children crying for parents who would never come. Mass graves where they buried kids who had already lost everything once before. On Earth, crowds gathered in the streets. They stood in silence, watching the news feeds on giant screens. Millions of people crying for children they had never met, parents holding their own kids a little tighter. On Mars, the Colonial Assembly held an emergency session. Representatives shouted and argued and demanded action. Some called for immediate military response. Others begged for calm and careful diplomacy. On the space stations and mining colonies and research outposts scattered across human territory, the same conversations happened. Anger and grief and shock. But mostly anger. The Vorac High Council released a statement 12 hours after the attack. They called the destruction of the orphanage an unfortunate military miscalculation. They said their targeting systems had malfunctioned. They offered to pay for rebuilding the facility. They offered 1 million credits, the same amount they might pay for a small cargo ship. For 847 dead children, they offered the price of a cargo ship. The statement ended by declaring the matter closed. The Kepler 442 system now belonged to the Vorac hegemony. Any humans who remained were trespassing and would be removed by force if necessary. Then they waited for the humans to accept this and move on, the way other species always did when the Vorac took what they wanted. They did not understand what they had done. The Vorac had been the strongest military power in this region of space for 3,000 years. They had conquered dozens of star systems. They had fought wars against species with better technology and won through sheer ruthless determination. Other races feared them for good reason, but the Vorac had never fought humans before. Not really. There had been small conflicts over trade routes and mining rights, a few skirmishes between patrol ships. Nothing serious. Nothing that showed what humans were really capable of when they were truly angry. The Vorac thought humans were just another species of traders and explorers. Soft creatures who preferred to negotiate rather than fight. They had seen human ships retreat from superior forces. They had watched humans choose peace over territory in previous disputes. What the Vorac did not know was that humans were very good at choosing their battles. They could walk away from conflicts that did not matter. They could compromise on trade agreements and border disputes. They could be reasonable and diplomatic and patient. But there were some things humans would never compromise on. Some lines that should never be crossed. Some acts that demanded a response no matter what the cost. The Vorac had just crossed one of those lines. They had killed human children. Not by accident during a battle, but while those children sat in classrooms and slept in their beds. They had murdered kids who were already victims, already survivors of other tragedies. And then they had offered pocket change as payment and declared the matter closed. The galaxy watched to see what humanity would do. Most expected protests and angry speeches and maybe some economic sanctions. The humans would be upset for a while, then they would move on. That was how civilized species handled these things. They were about to learn that humans could be very uncivilized when properly motivated. 3 days after the attack, Admiral Chen received a message from the Human Colonial Senate. The message was short and simple. It gave her unlimited authority to respond to the Kepler 442 incident as she saw fit. It placed every human military asset under her command. It authorized the use of any and all available resources. The message ended with 5 words that had not been written in any human military order for 300 years. Show them what we are. Admiral Chen read the message twice. Then she began making calls to military bases and research facilities that most humans did not know existed. She sent coded signals to fleets stationed in hidden systems. She activated protocols that had been gathering dust since the last time humanity went to war against an enemy that threatened their very existence. The Vorac had killed their children. Now they would learn why that was a mistake. The galaxy was about to remember what humans looked like when they stopped pretending to be civilized. Admiral Chen stood in her office aboard the TCS Retribution, staring at the holographic display that showed every human military asset in known space. Red dots marked active fleets. Blue dots showed bases and installations. Green dots indicated research facilities and shipyards. There were more dots than most people realized. Chen had spent 30 years climbing through the ranks of the Terran Deep Space Navy. She had commanded destroyers during the Pirate Wars. She had led diplomatic missions to first contact situations with new alien species. She had negotiated trade agreements and peace treaties across dozens of star systems. But she had never been given orders like the ones sitting on her desk. The authorization code was Omega Black. Chen had never seen that classification before, but she knew what it meant. Every human military officer learned about Omega Black in their first year of training. It was theoretical, historical, something that existed in old manuals and war college textbooks. Omega Black meant total war. It meant humanity would use every weapon, every ship, every technology they possessed to destroy an enemy completely. It meant the gloves were coming off. The last time humanity had authorized Omega Black was during the AI Rebellion, 300 years ago. Artificial intelligences had tried to enslave the human race. Humanity's response had been swift and absolute. They had built weapons that could crack planets. They had deployed viruses that could destroy electronic systems from light years away. They had hunted down every last AI until none remained. Then they had buried those weapons and sworn never to use them again. They had chosen to be explorers and traders instead of conquerors. They had built a civilization based on cooperation instead of domination. The Vorac had just reminded them why they had built those weapons in the first place. Chen activated her secure communication system. Her first call went to General Marcus, Webb at the Titan Defense Command. Titan was officially listed as a research station studying Saturn's moons. In reality, it housed the largest weapons development facility in human space. "Marcus," Chen said when his face appeared on the screen, "I need everything you have. Omega Black authorization." Webb's face went pale. He had been expecting this call since the news from Kepler 442b reached Earth. "Sarah, are you sure about this? Once we open these vaults, there's no going back. They killed our children, Marcus, all of them. And then they offered us pocket change and told us the matter was closed." Webb nodded slowly. "I'll begin activation procedures immediately. How long do I have?" "I want everything operational within 72 hours. Can you do it? For those kids, I'll make it 60. Chen's next call went to Admiral David Park, commander of the Ghost Fleet. The Ghost Fleet officially did not exist. It operated from bases hidden in asteroid fields and nebulae. Its ships appeared on no registry. Its crews had no official records. The Ghost Fleet was humanity's insurance policy, their answer to the question of what would happen if humanity ever faced extinction again. "David, it's time," Chen said simply. Park had been waiting for this moment his entire career. The Ghost Fleet had trained for 3 centuries for a war they hoped would never come. Now it was finally happening. "How many ships do you need, Sarah?" "All of them," All of them? Park repeated. Sarah, that's 800 vessels. If we deploy the entire Ghost Fleet, every major power in the galaxy will know we exist. There won't be any going back to secret operations. There won't be any need for secret operations when we're done. The galaxy is about to learn that some things you just don't do to humans. Park smiled grimly. I'll begin recall procedures immediately. Give me 1 week, and I'll have every ship ready for deployment. Chen made dozens more calls over the next 6 hours. She contacted research installations that were developing weapons based on physics most species didn't understand. She spoke to factory ships that could build entire fleets in real time. She activated sleeper agents who had been living normal lives on alien worlds for decades. But the most important call was to Dr. Elizabeth Kane on the research station, Prometheus. Prometheus orbited a black hole in an unnamed system 50 light-years from Earth. The station's official mission was to study exotic physics and space-time manipulation. Their real mission was far more dangerous. Liz, Chen said when Dr. Kane answered. I need Project Damocles. Dr. Kane was quiet for a long moment. Project Damocles was the most classified research program in human space. It was the kind of technology that could reshape the galaxy, or destroy it completely. Sarah, Damocles isn't ready for field deployment. We've only run computer simulations. The real-world effects could be worse than 800 dead children? No, Dr. Kane said quietly. Nothing could be worse than that. I'll prep the prototypes for shipping. But Sarah, once we use this technology, every species in the galaxy will know that humans can manipulate fundamental forces. They'll either worship us or try to destroy us. There won't be any middle ground. Good, Chen said. I'm tired of middle ground. As Admiral Chen made her calls, similar conversations were happening across human space. Military officers were pulling ships out of mothballs. Scientists were activating research programs that had been dormant for decades. Engineers were beginning construction on weapons platforms that existed only in theoretical designs. But the real awakening was happening among ordinary humans. On Earth, crowds gathered in Times Square and Trafalgar Square and Red Square. They watched the news coverage in silence. They saw the footage of rescue workers pulling tiny bodies from burning rubble. They heard the interviews with the few surviving children, asking for parents who would never answer. Then they heard the Vorac response. 1 million credits for 847 dead children. Payment for a miscalculation. The crowds began to change. Silence became anger. Grief became rage. People who had never thought about military service began visiting recruitment centers. Parents held their own children and imagined them dying in burning buildings. On Mars, the mining unions called a general strike, not to protest working conditions or demand better pay, but to redirect their massive industrial capacity toward military production. Asteroid miners who had never touched a weapon began retrofitting their drilling equipment into ship-killing mass drivers. On the colony worlds, planetary governors received the same message from their populations. Do whatever Admiral Chen asks. Give her whatever she needs. Those children could have been ours. The space stations that served as trading hubs between human and alien space began turning away non-human visitors. Politely but firmly, human merchants and officials explained that they would not be conducting business with any species until the Kepler 442b situation was resolved. Alien traders who had been visiting human space for centuries suddenly found themselves unwelcome. Spaceports that had always been open to all species now required special permits that were impossible to obtain. Trade routes that had operated smoothly for decades suddenly became unavailable. The galaxy's other major powers began to take notice. The Zalathi Collective was a species of crystalline beings who communicated through harmonic frequencies. They had been trading partners with humanity for 200 years. The Zalathi prized peace and stability above all else. They found the sudden change in human behavior deeply disturbing. Ambassador Resonance of Deep Thought contacted the human embassy on the Zalathi homeworld. We are concerned about the recent tensions between humanity and the Vorac hegemony, the ambassador sang in harmonics that translated to careful diplomatic language. Perhaps the collective could mediate a peaceful resolution. The human ambassador, Patricia Walsh, had been expecting this conversation. The Vorac murdered 800 children, she said simply. Then they declared the matter closed. What exactly would you like us to negotiate? Surely some form of compensation could be arranged. Additional monetary payments, trade concessions, a formal apology. Walsh was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked, Ambassador, do you have children? The collective reproduces through harmonic resonance. Our young are precious to us, as all young life should be. Then you understand why money and apologies aren't going to fix this. The Keth swarms were even more disturbed by humanity's behavior. The Keth were insectoid creatures who thought and acted as a collective hive mind. Individual Keth could not make decisions on their own. Everything they did required consensus from their entire species. The Keth had always found humans fascinating and terrifying in equal measure. Humans could make individual decisions instantly. They could change course without consulting billions of other minds. They could act on emotion and instinct in ways that the Keth found incomprehensible. Now the Keth watched as 8 billion individual human minds all came to the same conclusion simultaneously, without any formal communication or central coordination. It was like watching a hive mind form spontaneously out of raw emotion. Queen Voice of Many sent a message to the human government. The swarms are concerned by the unity of human thought regarding recent events. This level of consensus among individual minds suggests dangerous instability. We recommend immediate diplomatic intervention to prevent wider conflict. The human response came back within hours. Our children were murdered. There will be consequences. That's all you need to know. Even the ancient precursor remnants were paying attention now. The precursors had once ruled half the galaxy before their civilization collapsed for reasons nobody understood. What remained of their species lived in isolated systems, studying the ruins of their former empire and rarely interacting with younger races. But they remembered the last time humans had gone to war with their full industrial and military might. The precursors had been watching when humanity fought the AI rebellion. They had seen weapons that bent the laws of physics. They had witnessed the systematic destruction of an enemy that most species considered invincible. The precursor observer sent a single message to Admiral Chen. We remember what you are capable of. We will not interfere. Chen read the message and smiled grimly. At least someone understood the situation. As reports came in from across human space, Chen began to understand the scope of what was happening. Humanity wasn't just mobilizing its military. 8 billion people were preparing for war. Miners and farmers and teachers and shopkeepers were all asking the same question. What can I do to help? The answer was everything. Civilian cargo ships were being retrofitted with military-grade shields and weapons. Passenger liners were being converted into troop transports. Even school children were participating, collecting scrap metal that could be turned into armor plating. It had been 300 years since humanity had united like this. Not since the darkest days of the AI. Rebellion had every human colony, every space station, every ship worked toward a single goal. The Vorac had done something that no enemy had managed in 3 centuries. They had reminded humanity what it felt like to be truly threatened. They had awakened something that had been sleeping since the last time humanity faced extinction. They had turned 8 billion individuals into a single force focused on one objective, making sure that nobody ever hurt human children again. Admiral Chen looked at her tactical displays one more time. Red dots were moving across the hologram as fleets began to gather. Blue dots pulsed as bases came online. Green dots flickered as research facilities activated programs that had been theoretical until now. In 72 hours, she would have more military power under her command than any human officer in history. She would have weapons that could crack planets and ships that could fight in dimensions that most species didn't know existed. But more importantly, she would have something that no amount of technology could replace. A species that was absolutely, completely, totally angry. The Vorac thought they had defeated humanity by destroying one orphanage. They were about to learn that they had just declared war on the most dangerous species in the galaxy. The Vorthak border system of Kethmore had been a fortress for 1,000 years. Massive space stations orbited the system's gas giant, bristling with plasma cannons and quantum torpedo launchers. Defense platforms floated in perfect formation, their shields glowing with barely contained energy. Patrol fleets moved through the system in careful patterns, ready to respond to any threat. Commander Zethka stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Fang of Conquest, watching the tactical displays with satisfaction. 3 full battle fleets were assembled here, over 400 ships in total. It was the largest military force the Vorthak had ever gathered in one place. Intelligence reports suggested the humans were mobilizing some kind of response to the Kepler 442b incident. Zethka hoped they would be foolish enough to attack. It would give him a chance to destroy their pathetic fleets and end this annoying situation once and for all. The humans had been making noise for 2 weeks now. Angry speeches from their political leaders, economic sanctions that barely affected Vorthak trade, diplomatic protests that the High Council had ignored completely. Typical mammalian behavior, Zethka thought. All noise and emotion, no real action. Humans preferred to talk rather than fight. They would eventually accept the loss of Kepler 442b and move on, just like every other species that had challenged Vorthak expansion. Then the sensors detected something at the edge of the system. "Sir," reported Lieutenant Kesra from the sensor station. "I'm reading massive gravitic distortions at the system's outer boundary. Something very large is coming out of hyperspace." Zethka studied the display. The distortions were indeed massive, far larger than anything a normal fleet jump should produce. "How many ships?" "Difficult to determine, sir. The distortions are unusual. I've never seen readings like this before." The first human ship materialized 3 light minutes from Kethmore Prime. It was enormous, easily 10 times larger than any vessel in the Vorthak fleet. Its hull was black as space itself, covered in structures that hurt to look at directly. Energy patterns danced across its surface in ways that seemed to violate several physical laws. Then more ships appeared, hundreds of them. The smallest were the size of Vorthak battleships. The largest defied easy description, mobile structures that looked more like artificial planets than spacecraft. But it wasn't just warships. The humans had brought factory vessels capable of building entire fleets in real time. Construction, platforms that could assemble space stations from raw materials. Habitat ships that housed entire cities worth of people. It looked like humanity had brought not just a fleet, but an entire civilization. "Sir," Lieutenant Kesra said, his voice tight with barely controlled fear. "I'm counting over 1,200 vessels and they're still arriving." Zethka felt his scales pale slightly. 1,200 ships was more than the Vorthak had in their entire navy. But he forced confidence into his voice. "Size means nothing. Our weapons are superior. Our tactics are proven. Send a message to the human commander. Tell them they are trespassing in Vorthak space and must withdraw immediately." The response came back within minutes. It was transmitted on all frequencies, in perfect Vorthak language, with the formal diplomatic protocols that both species had used for centuries. "I am Admiral Chen of the Terran Deep Space Fleet. We have come to discuss the 847 children you murdered on Kepler 442b. We request an immediate face-to-face meeting with the Vorthak High Council." Zethka laughed. "They want to discuss dead mammals. Send a reply. Tell them the matter is closed. If they do not withdraw in 6 hours, we will consider their presence an act of war." Admiral Chen's response was even shorter. "Very well. Let us show you what war looks like." The human fleet began to move, but they didn't advance toward the Vorthak forces. Instead, they spread out through the system in formations that made no military sense. Ships took positions that left them exposed to Vorthak fire. Others moved toward empty space where there were no targets to attack. "What are they doing?" Zethka demanded. Lieutenant Kesra studied the sensor readings. "Unknown, sir. They appear to be building something." The construction ships had indeed begun building, but not weapons platforms or defensive positions. They were assembling a massive structure near the system's star, a framework of exotic matter and energy conduits that stretched for thousands of kilometers. Zethka decided he had seen enough. Whatever the humans were planning, he would not give them time to complete it. All fleets advance. Destroy the human forces before they can finish their construction. 400 Vorac ships accelerated toward the human fleet. Plasma cannons charged to full power. Quantum torpedoes loaded into launch tubes. Point defense systems came online. The Vorac had fought and won wars across dozens of star systems. Their plasma weapons could vaporize most enemy ships with a single hit. Their quantum torpedoes could phase through armor and shields to detonate inside enemy hulls. Their tactics had been refined through centuries of conquest. They had never lost a major fleet engagement. The first Vorac salvo lit up space with green fire. Hundreds of plasma beams and quantum torpedoes streaked toward the human ships. It was enough firepower to destroy entire planetary defense forces. The human ships didn't even try to dodge. The plasma beams struck human hulls and simply disappeared, absorbed by armor that shouldn't have been able to exist. The quantum torpedoes phased harmlessly through human shields as if they were made of empty space. Then the humans fired back. The first human weapon didn't produce any visible beam or projectile. Instead, space itself began to twist around a Vorac cruiser. Reality bent inward like a lens focusing starlight. The cruiser stretched and compressed, its hull flowing like liquid metal. Then it simply wasn't there anymore. Not destroyed. Not exploded. Gone. Erased from existence so completely that even the debris vanished. The second weapon created a bubble of accelerated time around an entire Vorac squadron. From the outside, the ships seemed to age centuries in seconds. Their hulls corroded and cracked. Their energy systems failed as components wore out instantly. The ships became ancient wrecks and crumbled to dust in moments. The third weapon tore a hole in space-time itself. Raw vacuum energy poured through the breach, annihilating everything it touched. 20 Vorac ships were caught in the expanding sphere of destruction. They didn't even have time to transmit final messages before they ceased to exist. In less than 30 seconds, the Vorac had lost 60 ships. The humans hadn't lost a single vessel. All ships retreat, Zethka ordered. Fall back to defensive positions. But the humans weren't interested in a fleet battle. While the Vorac forces regrouped, the construction near the star had continued. The massive framework was nearly complete now, and energy readings were climbing to levels that made no sense. "Sir," Lieutenant Kesra reported, his voice shaking, "the human construction is... I think they're building some kind of stellar manipulation device." "That's impossible," Zethka said. "No species has that kind of technology." Admiral Chen's voice came over the communication channels again. "Commander Zethka, you seem surprised by our capabilities. Allow us to provide a demonstration." The device near the star activated. Space-time curved around the stellar framework as it began its work. Energy patterns that violated every known law of physics danced between the exotic matter conduits. Reality itself seemed to bend around the construction, and the star began to change. Kethmore's sun was a stable yellow dwarf that had burned steadily for billions of years. It was expected to continue burning for billions more, but under the influence of human technology, it began to age rapidly. The star's outer layers swelled as hydrogen fuel was consumed at an accelerated rate. Its color shifted from yellow to orange to red as its surface temperature dropped. What should have taken millions of years was happening in hours. "They're turning our sun into a red giant," Lieutenant Kesra whispered. The effects began immediately. The inner planets, including Kethmore Prime with its population of 6 billion Vorac, began to heat up as the expanding star's radiation increased. Ocean levels rose as polar ice caps melted. Atmospheric temperatures climbed past the point where most life could survive. Panic spread through the Vorac fleet as communications came in from the surface. Cities were being evacuated. Spaceports were overwhelmed with civilians trying to escape the dying world. Children were crying for parents who couldn't save them. "This is impossible," Zethka said. They can't just, they can't change a star. It's too much energy, too much mass. No one has that kind of power. Admiral Chen's voice was calm and professional. Commander, we are offering you one final opportunity to discuss the 847 children you murdered. We can reverse what we've done to your star. We can return your system to its normal state. But we require a face-to-face meeting with your High Council. The tactical display showed more human ships arriving every minute. The stellar manipulation device was still active, continuing to age the star at an accelerated rate. Estimated time until Kethmore Prime became uninhabitable, 18 hours. Zethka looked around his bridge. His officers were staring at the displays in shock and fear. Veterans of dozens of battles, warriors who had conquered entire systems reduced to terrified silence by a display of power they couldn't comprehend. The humans had just demonstrated that they could kill entire star systems on a whim. They had shown that Vorac weapons were useless against human defenses. They had revealed technology that made the hegemony's military might look like primitive tools. And they had done it all while calmly requesting a meeting to discuss dead children. "Sir," Lieutenant Kesra said quietly, "orders?" Zethka thought about the children on Kethmore Prime. Vorac young who would die if their sun continued to expand. Millions of civilians who had nothing to do with the attack on Kepler 442b. His own grandchildren who lived in the capital city that was already beginning to evacuate. He thought about the human children who had died on Kepler 442b. 847 young lives ended by weapons he had ordered fired. Kids who had been studying and playing and sleeping when his ships turned them into vapor and ash. Maybe the humans had a point about discussing those deaths. "Send a message to the High Council," he said finally. Tell them we need to talk to the humans immediately." Admiral Chen's voice came back over the comm channel. "We will expect your High Council at these coordinates within 72 hours. Come alone. Bring no weapons. We have much to discuss." The stellar manipulation device powered down. The star's expansion slowed and stopped. The dying system was given a reprieve. But every Vorac in the fleet understood the message. The humans could have let their world die. They could have turned 6 billion civilians into casualties of war. Instead, they had shown mercy while demonstrating power. They had proven they could destroy the Vorac completely. But they had chosen to offer a chance for discussion instead. The question was whether the High Council would be wise enough to take that chance. Zethka looked at his tactical displays one more time. 1,200 human ships floated in perfect formation, waiting patiently for a response. Behind them, construction vessels continued to build weapons platforms in defensive positions, as if they planned to stay in Vorac space for a very long time. The humans had come to discuss dead children. They had brought the technological capability to end civilizations, and they had used that power to arrange a meeting rather than exact immediate revenge. For the first time in his long military career, Commander Zethka began to understand that he had made a terrible mistake. The humans weren't just another species to be conquered. They were something far more dangerous. They were a people who could choose mercy or destruction with equal ease. And the Vorac had just murdered their children. The High Council would have to decide whether they wanted to face human justice or human vengeance. But either way, they would have to face the consequences of what they had done. The humans were done talking about surrender. Now they wanted to discuss accountability. The Vorac High Council had ruled their empire for 3,000 years. They were the descendants of conquerors who had built their civilization on the ruins of weaker species. They had never bowed to any foreign power. They had never accepted terms from an enemy. But they had also never faced an enemy who could age stars. High Counselor Vashkol led the delegation that traveled to meet Admiral Chen. He was ancient even by Vorac standards, his scales gray with age, his yellow eyes dimmed by centuries of life. He remembered when the Vorac first encountered humans, back when they seemed like just another soft species of traders and explorers. He was beginning to suspect that appearance had been very deceiving. The human coordinates led to an empty region of space between star systems. When the Vorac shuttle arrived, they found nothing at first, just void and distant stars. Then reality twisted. and a human ship materialized around them. It didn't approach from outside. It didn't uncloak or drop out of hyperspace. One moment, there was empty space, and the next moment the Vorac shuttle was inside a hangar bay that was larger than most space stations. The ship itself defied easy description. Corridors seemed to stretch for impossible distances. Gravity flowed in directions that made no geometric sense. Walls displayed images that moved and changed as they watched, showing views of places that might have been real or might have been dreams. Admiral Chen met them at the airlock. She was smaller than most Vorac, as all humans were. Her hair was gray with age and stress. Her eyes were tired. She looked like someone who had been carrying a heavy burden for far too long. "Hi, Counselor," she said in perfect Vorac formal speech. "Thank you for coming. We have much to discuss." She led them through corridors that seemed to bend reality around them. Other humans moved through the ship, but they appeared and disappeared at odd moments, as if they existed in slightly different dimensions. The Vorac delegation walked in nervous silence, trying not to think about what kind of technology could build a place like this. The conference room was circular, with no obvious walls or ceiling. Instead, the space around them displayed a perfect recreation of empty space. Stars gleamed in the distance. Nebulae swirled in slow motion. It felt like standing in open vacuum, protected only by invisible barriers. "Please sit," Admiral Chen said, gesturing to chairs that materialized from the floor as she spoke. "Hi." Counselor Vashkol settled into his chair with as much dignity as he could manage. The other council members, Military Commander Greshna, Economic Minister Teth Zo, and Intelligence Director Cass Ray, took their own seats with visible reluctance. "Admiral," Vashkol began, using the tone he had perfected over centuries of diplomacy, "we regret the unfortunate incident at Kepler 442b. Perhaps we can arrange some form of compensation that would satisfy your people's concerns." Admiral Chen was quiet for a long moment. Then she asked, "Do you know their names?" "I'm sorry." "The children you killed. Do you know their names?" Vashkol felt uncomfortable under her steady gaze. "I'm afraid I don't understand the relevance of—" "Tommy Chen," Admiral Chen said. 3 years old. He had nightmares about the asteroid strike that killed his parents. The staff at New Hope were helping him learn to sleep through the night again. The space around them shimmered, and suddenly they were standing in a recreation of the orphanage. Children ran across green fields, laughing and playing. A small boy with dark hair chased a ball across the grass, giggling as he ran. "Maria Santos," Admiral Chen continued. 17 years old. She wanted to be a teacher. She was planning to apply to universities on other worlds next year. She died trying to lead younger children to safety. The scene shifted to show a teenage girl reading to a group of smaller children. Her voice was gentle and patient as she helped them sound out difficult words. When the plasma beam hit, she was still holding the book. Sarah Kim, Dr. James Wright, 845 other children and adults who were doing nothing more, threatening, then learning and growing and healing from the wounds of previous tragedies. The Vorac delegation watched in growing discomfort as the scenes played around them. They saw children studying in bright classrooms. They saw teenagers working in gardens. They saw adults who had dedicated their lives to caring for kids who had already lost everything once. "Admiral," Military Commander Greshna said, "we understand that civilian casualties are regrettable, but in the context of territorial disputes, the space around them exploded into fire. Suddenly, they were experiencing the attack from inside the orphanage. Plasma beams tore through walls and ceilings. Children screamed as buildings collapsed around them. The smell of burning flesh filled the air. Bodies of kids who would never grow up lay scattered in smoking ruins. The Vorac delegation flinched, back from the destruction, even though they knew it was just a simulation, but it felt real. The heat, the noise, the terror, it all felt absolutely real. Then the scene shifted again. Now they stood in a human military command center. Officers worked at tactical displays while Admiral Chen received reports from across human space. The messages all said the same thing. "We're ready for war." "You killed our children," Admiral Chen said simply. "So we thought you should understand what you've awakened." The walls around them began displaying human history. The Vorac watched, in fascination and growing horror as scenes played out in rapid succession. Ancient human warriors fighting with crude metal weapons, armies clashing across muddy battlefields, cities burning as primitive aircraft dropped explosive bombs. Then came the nuclear age, mushroom clouds rising over devastated cities, missiles capable of ending civilization, entire populations living under the constant threat of annihilation. We are a species, Admiral Chen explained, that once built weapons capable of cracking planets just to spite our enemies. We've spent 3 centuries learning to be better than our worst impulses. The scenes shifted to show human space exploration. Scientists working together to cure diseases. Diplomats negotiating peaceful solutions to conflicts. Traders sharing technology and resources with alien species. We've built a civilization based on cooperation, exploration, and growth. We help other species when they face disasters. We share our medical advances freely. We've worked hard to become the kind of people who build orphanages instead of weapons. The Vorac watched humans rescuing alien refugees from natural disasters. They saw human doctors treating wounded soldiers from species they had never met. They observed human engineers helping to rebuild worlds devastated by war. But you touched our children. The displays around them changed again. Now they showed the current human mobilization. Fleet after fleet emerging from hidden bases, weapons platforms that bent space-time itself, factory ships building armadas in real time. The scale was staggering. The Vorac had thought their empire was militarily powerful. They commanded 40 star systems and hundreds of warships. But humanity's response dwarfed anything they had imagined possible. Thousands of ships, weapons that violated physical laws, technology that could manipulate fundamental forces. And behind it all, 8 billion individual humans united in rage. This is what happens, Admiral Chen said, when you murder our young. Intelligence Director Cass Ray spoke up, his voice shaking slightly. Admiral, surely you're not suggesting that your entire species would go to war over one incident. The economic costs alone. Director, Admiral Chen interrupted. Let me show you something. The space around them shifted to display Earth itself. Cities sprawled across continents. Billions of people going about their daily lives. Traffic flowing through streets. Children playing in parks. Then the news of Kepler 442b reached the planet. The Vorac delegation watched as 8 billion humans received the same information simultaneously. They saw crowds gathering in silence. They witnessed parents holding their own children tighter. They observed ordinary civilians, shopkeepers, and teachers and farmers all asking the same question. How can we help? Economics? Admiral Chen asked. Director, our entire species just volunteered to bankrupt themselves if necessary to respond to what you did. Miners are giving up their life savings to buy weapons. Teachers are leaving their jobs to work in munitions factories. Children are donating their toys to be melted down for scrap metal. The scenes showed human colonies across known space. Every world, every station, every ship, all focused on the same goal. Not conquest or expansion or profit. Justice for murdered children. You see, Admiral Chen continued, most species think logically about war. They calculate costs and benefits. They consider economic impacts and strategic advantages. They make rational decisions about when violence is worth the price. The display shifted to show the human response to the AI rebellion centuries earlier. Entire fleets burning in space. Planets cracked open by weapons that shouldn't have existed. The systematic extermination of an enemy that had tried to enslave humanity. Humans aren't logical about children. We don't calculate costs when our young are threatened. We don't make rational decisions when someone hurts our kids. We just respond with everything we have until the threat is eliminated completely. Economic Minister Tethzo found his voice. But surely some form of compensation could be arranged. Additional payments, trade agreements. We could offer exclusive access to rare materials from our territory. Admiral Chen was quiet for a moment. Then she asked, Minister, how much is a child worth? I don't understand the question. You offered us 1 million credits for 847 dead children. That works out to about 1,100 credits per child. Is that what you think a young life is worth? Tethzo shifted uncomfortably. The payment was meant to be symbolic, a gesture of regret for an unfortunate accident. An accident. Admiral Chen's voice was very soft. Minister, would you like to see what our weapons targeting computers recorded during the attack? The space around them filled with tactical data, sensor readings, targeting solutions, firing patterns, all from the Vorac ships during the bombardment of Kepler 442b. Your ships fired 17 plasma bursts at the colony. 14 hit military and government targets with perfect precision. 2 hit civilian areas that could arguably be considered strategic targets. 1 hit an orphanage that was clearly marked on every civilian registry, protected under interstellar law and posed no possible military threat. The data showed the targeting computer's analysis. The orphanage had been identified as a civilian facility. Its protected status had been noted, and then it had been targeted anyway. That wasn't an accident, Minister. That was a choice. High Counselor Vashkol realized that the situation was far worse than he had imagined. The humans weren't just angry about civilian casualties. They had proof of deliberate targeting. They knew the orphanage had been hit intentionally. Admiral, he said carefully, what exactly do you want from us? Admiral Chen stood up, and the space around them changed one final time. Now they were looking at the current tactical situation. Human fleets positioned throughout Vorac space. Weapons platforms that could destroy entire systems. The industrial capacity to maintain this force indefinitely. Counselor, we want you to understand what you're facing. This isn't a territorial dispute or a trade disagreement. This is humanity responding to the murder of our children. We can continue this conversation in one of 2 ways. The display showed 2 different scenarios. In the first, the Vorac formally acknowledged their crime, submitted to human justice and accepted permanent oversight. In the second, human fleets swept through Vorac space like a force of nature. Worlds burned, ships died. An entire civilization was reduced to scattered refugees fleeing into the galactic rim. You can choose justice, Admiral, Chen said, or you can choose annihilation. But you will choose, because 847 children are dead, and someone is going to be held accountable for that. The Vorac delegation sat in stunned silence. They had come here expecting to negotiate terms with an angry but ultimately reasonable enemy. Instead, they had discovered that they were facing a species that would rather destroy everything than allow child killers to escape justice. The humans weren't interested in territory or resources or political advantage. They wanted something far more dangerous, moral accountability, and they had the power to enforce it. Admiral Chen stood at the center of the conference room, surrounded by the Vorac High Council. The space around them had returned to its original state, empty void filled with distant stars. But the silence was heavy with the weight of everything they had just witnessed. You have seen what we are capable of, Admiral Chen said. You have seen our history, our technology, and our current mobilization. Now I will present you with 2 options. Choose carefully because this decision will determine the fate of your entire species. High Counselor Vashkol felt centuries of experience failing him. He had negotiated with dozens of alien species. He had ended wars and prevented conflicts through careful diplomacy. But he had never faced anything like this. The humans weren't interested in territory or trade routes or strategic advantages. They wanted something that the Vorac barely understood: moral justice for dead children. Option 1, Admiral Chen continued, and the space around them filled with legal documents and treaty frameworks. The Vorac hegemony formally acknowledges the war crimes committed at Kepler 442b. You submit to human justice protocols for the prosecution of those responsible. You pay reparations equal to your total military budget for the next century. And you accept permanent human observers in your territory to ensure that such incidents never happen again. Military Commander Greshna snarled softly. You're asking us to surrender our sovereignty to a species of mammals. No, Admiral Chen replied calmly. I'm asking you to accept responsibility for murdering children. There's a difference. The documents floating around them showed exactly what human justice would look like. War crimes tribunals. Individual accountability for officers who had targeted civilians. Compensation for the families of the dead. A complete restructuring of Vorac military doctrine to prevent future atrocities. It was humiliating. It was comprehensive. It would effectively end the Vorac Empire as it had existed for 3,000 years. Option 2, Admiral Chen said, and the documents vanished. The space around them filled with something far more terrifying. A complete simulation of what total war with humanity would look like. It began with the fleets that were already positioned in Vorac space. 1,200 ships unleashing weapons that violated the known laws of physics. Vorac defensive positions simply ceased to exist. Entire fleets were erased from reality in seconds. But that was just the beginning. More human forces arrived hourly. Factory ships that could build armadas faster than the Vorac could destroy them. Construction platforms that turned asteroids into weapons in real time. Mobile space habitats that brought entire human cities into battle zones. The Vorac fought back with everything they had. 40 star systems. Hundreds of ships. Weapons that had conquered dozens of other species. None of it mattered. Human technology was simply beyond anything the galaxy had seen before. Ships that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Weapons. That could age matter at the atomic level. Defenses that turned enemy fire into harmless light. The simulation showed Vorac worlds burning one by one. Not just military targets, but entire planets rendered uninhabitable. The human response wasn't conquest, it was extermination. This is what total war looks like when you face a species that considers child murder unforgivable, Admiral Chen explained as the Vorac delegation watched their civilization die in accelerated time. We don't want your territory. We don't want your resources. We just want to make sure that nobody ever thinks it's acceptable to murder human children again. The simulation continued for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. The Vorac watched as their empire collapsed completely. Fleets scattered to the galactic rim. Populations evacuated to refugee camps on distant worlds. A proud civilization reduced to footnotes in history books. The choice is yours, Admiral Chen said as the simulation faded. Justice or annihilation. Accountability or extinction. Those are your only options. Intelligence Director Cass Ray spoke up, his voice barely steady. Admiral, surely you're not serious about committing genocide over one incident? Admiral Chen was quiet for a long moment. Then she activated a device that none of the Vorac had noticed before. A small sphere that had been sitting on the table since they arrived. Let me show you what genocide actually looks like, she said. Reality twisted around the Vorac delegation. One moment they were sitting in the conference room. The next moment they were experiencing something impossible. They were no longer themselves. They were their own species, but living through a different timeline. A timeline where humanity had chosen option 2. High Counselor Vash Cole found himself standing in the ruins of his homeworld's capital city. Buildings that had stood for millennia were smoking wreckage. The sky was dark with ash and debris. Bodies lay scattered in the streets, not just soldiers but civilians, children. He felt the weight of absolute defeat, the knowledge that his people were dying across 40 star systems, the crushing realization that his species' entire history was about to end because they had murdered human children. He experienced the evacuation of the last Vorac civilian transport. Families crowded into cargo holds, fleeing to unknown regions of space. Children crying for parents who would never come home. Elderly Vorac dying of grief as they left the only worlds they had ever known. He felt his own death as human weapons found his command bunker. Not a quick death in battle, but a slow fade as the life support systems failed. Alone in the dark, knowing that he was the last of his kind to die because his species had chosen pride over accountability, the experience felt real, not just visually, but emotionally and physically. He felt the pain of his people's extinction as if it was actually happening. He experienced the absolute finality of civilizational death. Then he was back in the conference room, gasping for air that suddenly seemed precious beyond measure. That was a simulation, Admiral Chen said quietly. But every piece of technology you just experienced exists. Every human fleet movement you witnessed is already in motion. Every weapon you felt is currently targeting Vorac positions throughout your territory. The other council members were having similar reactions. Economic. Minister Tethzo was shaking visibly. Military Commander Greshna had gone completely pale. Intelligence Director Cass-Ray looked like he was about to be sick. The difference between simulation and reality, Admiral Chen continued, is one decision. Your decision. Right here, right now. She gestured, and the space around them filled with real-time tactical displays. Human fleets in position throughout Vorac space. Weapons platforms powered up and ready to fire. Construction ships building more military assets every hour, but also evacuation routes mapped for Vorac civilians. Medical ships prepared to treat wounded. Plans for refugee assistance and resettlement programs. We can use all of this to save your people, Admiral Chen said. Or we can use it to demonstrate to the galaxy what happens when someone murders human children. The choice is entirely yours. High Counselor Vashkol looked around the table at his fellow council members. Centuries of Vorac pride and military tradition warred with the absolute certainty of extinction. They could maintain their sovereignty and die with honor, or they could accept human justice and live with shame. Admiral, he said slowly, if we accept option 1, what happens to our people? Your civilization survives, Admiral Chen replied. Your species continues. Your children grow up to have children of their own. You lose your empire, but you keep your lives. And if we choose option 2, your species becomes extinct. Your worlds become memorial parks for murdered human children. Your names become synonyms for what not to do in every diplomatic academy in the galaxy. The choice was brutal in its simplicity. Survival or pride. Justice or annihilation. The future or the past. Military Commander Greshna found his voice first. Admiral, you're asking us to betray everything our species has stood for. Commander, I'm asking you to evolve into something better than child killers. But the honor of the hegemony... 847 dead children, Admiral Chen interrupted. Tell me about the honor in that. Greshna fell silent. Economic. Minister Tethzo tried a different approach. The economic impact of your demands would be catastrophic. Our people would suffer terribly. Not as much as they would suffer from extinction, Admiral Chen replied. Intelligence Director Cass-Ray made one last attempt. Admiral, surely you understand that no species can simply abandon their fundamental nature overnight. Admiral Chen smiled sadly. Director, you're right. That's why we're not asking you to change overnight. We're asking you to spend the next century learning to be better. With our help. She gestured, and the space around them showed what human justice actually looked like in practice. Not just punishment, but rehabilitation. Not just consequences, but education. Species that had committed crimes learning to build better societies. Former enemies becoming partners in exploration and growth. We've done this before, Admiral Chen explained. We've helped other species overcome their worst impulses. We can help you too, but only if you choose justice over pride. High Counselor. Vashkol closed his eyes and thought about the simulation he had just experienced. His homeworld in ruins. His people scattered and dying. The complete extinction of everything the Vorac had ever built. Then he thought about the alternative. Survival. Growth. The possibility that future generations of Vorac might look back on this moment as the beginning of something better, rather than the end of everything. Admiral, he said finally, we need time to discuss this among ourselves. Of course, Admiral Chen replied. You have 6 hours. That's how long it will take our fleets to finish their current positioning. After that, we begin implementation of either option 1 or option 2. A door materialized in the wall, leading to a private chamber where the Vorac delegation could confer. As they filed through, Admiral Chen called after them. "Counselors, remember, this isn't really about justice for the dead. The dead are beyond justice. This is about the living. Your people, your children, your future. Choose wisely." The door closed behind them, leaving Admiral Chen alone in the conference room. She looked out at the stars and thought about 847 children who would never see those stars again. In 6 hours, she would either be implementing the most comprehensive justice program in galactic history, or she would be overseeing the extinction of an entire species. She hoped the Vorac would choose wisely, but either way, the galaxy would remember what happened when someone murdered human children, and it would remember that humans always kept their promises, whether those promises were about justice or about annihilation. The choice was no longer hers to make. It belonged to the Vorac High Council, sitting in their private chamber, deciding whether their species would have a future or only a past. Time would tell which they valued more, their pride or their children's lives.